Good people, great people, guys, people. What's happening? How y'all feeling? Good people, great people, guys, people. How y'all feeling? How y'all feeling? Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to the Soul Care Collective. I'm Master Odie, right? And today, we're gonna be speaking with Mr. Sylvan LaCue about childhood trauma. Acknowledging it, tackling it, understanding it, getting through it. And you know what I'm saying? We're hoping that by the end of this live, y'all will learn a little bit something, understand things a little bit differently, and then, move forward with your own healing at your own pace. And hopefully, we continue to learn from it. All right? So I see Sylvan joined. Sylvan, bro, you got a request to be in the live in order for us to both hop on the live and have a conversation. And actually, bro, I just sent you a request, so we could probably get it cracking that way too. Yo, Sylvan, how you living, bro?
I'm living, man. I'm living. I'm alive.
Good.
How you been, man?
I'm decent, man. I can't complain. I cannot. It's a vibe. It's a vibe right now. You feel me? So
Mhm.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. So I was told that you have a hard out at 8.
Yeah,
So
I got right out at 8, man.
yeah, man, it's all good, man. That's usually how my client sessions go anyway. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna make it a power hour and we're gonna move from there.
We in the building. Let's get it cracking, man.
Most definitely, most definitely. So where would you like to start this conversation, or where would you imagine this conversation beginning if this was an open and honest, candid conversation just between two black men? G?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, I guess I'd like to start the conversation. I guess basically just around the idea of childhood trauma,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just how prominent it is, and how elusive it can be. I think that's kind of where I want to start at. For me personally, that's what I've been going through the past 3 years.
Right.
I would say maybe since like the end of 2018, going into 2019.
Right.
I much child was really running my movements and my decisions, from business to relationships to friendships, my beliefs, things that I thought that I made hardcore decisions about that were of me, like purely solely. I realized that I made a lot of decisions in my past that I just never looked back to.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I just want to start right there, like the elusiveness of childhood trauma and how much of an impact it does have without you even really knowing. You know what I mean? Also, especially just being on top of that, being black. You know what I mean? It's just like it's just like it's layers on layers. You know what I mean? So yeah, if anything, that's why I would like to start out for.
Absolutely. So to answer your question about trauma overall, when we think about trauma, we tend to think about trauma as things that are very large, right? Things that are like, mass shootings, earthquakes, things of that nature. Trauma can be anything that significantly impacts your ability to engage in a particular situation without having a particular level of comfort. So somebody can perceive seeing a car accident as traumatic because they saw all of the gory aftermath of that car accident without actually being involved in that car accident. Does that make sense? So when we're talking about the whole idea of the elusiveness of trauma, trauma can be relatively elusive, not necessarily in its inception, but in dealing with and processing that trauma, right? So we as black people, and by by that logic, black children, we have the largest exposure to trauma. We experience the most trauma statistically. So with us as individuals, we have to be very careful about how it is that we define trauma, but also how it is that we approach and process our own trauma as black people, because at times it can be relatively difficult to resolve trauma if we have internalized that trauma as something that we should be quote unquote proud of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, proud, proud. That's could you emphasize that a little bit more, just in terms, I mean, or dig a little bit deeper into that? Um,
Most definitely, most definitely. So when we think about how Black people have learned to move through the different types of intergenerational traumas that we have moved through, we have, in a sense, internalized our ability to be resilient as equivalent with being able to suppress trauma, right? So when I say pride, what I mean is that there are some Black people who take pride in not being, or there are some Black people who take pride in being able to go through multiple traumatic events and not be phased by it,
yeah,
right? That's not normal.
yeah,
And that comes from a space of being around so much trauma that it becomes an identifier for strength, or it becomes an identifier for resiliency. So that's one of the multiple ways that trauma is normalized in the Black community. It's worn as a badge of honor. Like, oh, you know what I'm saying? When we was all growing up, I ain't had 2 pennies to put together. Oh shit, I ain't have a window. I ain't have a pot to piss in the window, throw it out of. It becomes a contest for who experienced the most trauma, or who experienced the most destabilization. And when you really sit and think about the conversation from a clinical context, it then becomes, why do we normalize this instead of uprooting the causes of these things at their core?
yeah. The badge of honor, that's real. That's very real. Like, even I definitely identify with that. At just going throughout my life, like, it really became about taking pride in being like stoic. Um, you know what I mean? Being able to take as much as I can on my back, not complain,
Right.
um, carry the load, hold the responsibility. You know what I mean? Not really question too much about it. Like, that was yeah, I never really I never really thought about it in that context. Like, even just talking with friends, or even how I respond to I think even how I respond to people who are privileged or do have opportunities that I didn't necessarily have or wasn't afforded coming up, or just even in the same context of right now, like how I may feel like if someone is doing better at this very moment, like, I'll immediately go back to, like, yeah, I had to do such and such and such, and I had to hold this on my back, and this has made me who I am. Um, I never identified that as pride, but it is. That's real. That's very.
Absolutely. And even if we were to break it down in the way that we as Black children are indoctrinated to learn that. So, like, did you ever remember playing that game where you would, like, you ever remember the game Bloody Knuckles?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of
Right.
course.
It's how much you can literally hit an object and cause this. It's literally teaching you self harm. How many times you can hit an object and until your knuckles get bloody without wincing,
Yeah.
right? Without showing any type of pain. So there's this idea that the more pain that we can go through, or the more pain that we can stomach, it makes us stronger as people. When the reality of the situation is, it's priming us to become desensitized to trauma.
Mm,
And when you become desensitized to trauma, it makes it that much harder to resolve that trauma or to heal that trauma, because you don't recognize it as trauma. You just recognize it as something that you went through.
yeah. Does that stem specifically from somewhere? I would assume, like, from I would assume, of course, from maybe like your parents and how you raised, environment.
Hmm.
But is there a deeper root in terms to uh, why we embrace what we're able to go through as pride, or as like a badge of honor, or it's just something that we can wear on our chests? Um, like, where does that stem from?
So for Black people specifically, it definitely stems from slavery, right? It stems from being enslaved. The person who could stand the most beating, or the person who could stand the most beratement from the master, was usually the person who was rewarded, the quote unquote rewarded the most. And it's almost like giving somebody giving somebody scraps so that you can continue to steal food from them, right? And then telling them to be happy with the scraps that you've given them, because I'm really not obligated to give you anything. I don't got to do shit for you, right? So when you really think about it from that perspective, it then becomes intergenerational, in so much as our parents, or the environment around us teaching us how to be stoic, or teaching us how to internalize these narratives that are indicative of literally learning how to be beaten without saying anything.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah. Yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I feel like it translates, if it translates in like all aspects of our lives. Like I feel like that translated in me being like a musician. Um, I thought like just being like frank, like
mm,
I chose music as like a response to my trauma. Like
mm,
uh, my father was, was very inconsistent in my life.
mm,
My mother was very hard because she was a single black mother and she had to take care of, like every other, like damn near every other black black male, strong black woman who had to take care more of the share of the load. So there wasn't a lot of room for emotions. I was a sensitive kid, and then my environment didn't really promote, expressing emotion.
mm.
And I knew like my options were like very limited, and I saw my consequences very early from just from either family members or my homies that got into things and situations that I knew I wasn't built for. So
Right.
music was the immediate with like, oh yo, yeah, this like this is what I'm about to zone all my real energy into. And I thought that this would be necessarily the escape. Something that I enjoyed could be the escape from an environment, also an escape from not being heard, an escape from not being cared for, um, but also realized that like I had the same responses still in my environment. Like I shut down, I cut off my emotions, damn near, or severely detached, not cut off, but severely detached myself from my emotions, just because my environment permitted it. Being around my mother and my father, that permitted that. And so I was still carrying all these like trauma responses into the choice that I chose to escape what was happening around me. So I didn't really escape. I just took an avenue out. You know what I mean? Like I took an avenue to not be necessarily around it, but I still have my responses from my environment. And that led to like a lot of my decision making and not expressing how I felt, not feeling like, how I felt was really valuable, stoicness, taking pride in what I can hold on my back. And that created a lot of isolation. I found myself in a space where I'm like, why am I doing what I love? And why am I where I wanted to be, but something's not connecting? I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel happy. I still feel like the same kid that was in Miami, Florida, just trying to figure it out, staring out into the, space. So for me personally, like it crept up on me and I couldn't identify it for the life of me for a while, not until 2019. So it feels like that same notion, it just it still transfers its way into your life in some type of way if you're not able to identify it. And like I'm just turned 30 years old. I'm 3 years into like really at least starting to get some type of clarity about it or some type of understanding and going back to roots. But I'm still like, yo, wow, this is a response. This is something that I learned. This is something that I learned. Oh, this isn't really mine. Like, it's insane, man.
Most definitely, most definitely. And I did listen to the Search and Sylvan EP, and I did listen to the Young Sylvan EP. And listening to those, no problem, bro, no problem. Like listening to those EPs back to back, a lot of what it is that you're talking about now, I pulled from Searching Sylvan. Like I felt it, I gleaned it, right? It so especially the track Should I, where you were doing a lot of existential questioning, and then the existential questioning was interrupted by your mother literally coming in and saying to you, you ain't do shit, why you didn't do this, why you didn't do that, right? Not knowing that you were in a period where it's like, I really don't know what it is that I want to do with my life. And that can cause situational depression. And a lot of black parents don't recognize situational depression because, once again, they have internalized that ability to power through things. So when we really talk about the single family dynamic and we talk about how it is that impacts children, black children especially, that can be a type of trauma as well. right? So the conversation that's really popular right now on the internet and on social media is whether or not spanking is something that's traumatic for children.
Mm,
And the evidence goes both ways, but it's strongly in the way of yes, it can be traumatic for children. But within black families, a whooping is like, bro, if you don't whoop your kids, then you doing something wrong,
mm,
right? The narrative in Searching Sylvan was one of I'm literally trying to find myself, or this is what I gleaned from it. I'm trying to find myself in a space where nobody else is looking for me,
yeah,
right? So when you're in this space and you also recognize that nobody else is looking for you, that's where that isolation comes from. That's where, like you said, this ceiling is starting to become too familiar, right? Because I find myself in this space a lot. And you having to come back home or you having to come back to the space where you probably either because home is not comfortable for everybody,
yeah,
right? And home means different things at different parts in your life, right? Once you get past a particular age, going back home to some people can feel like failure, right? Having to return back to where you started feels shitty,
yeah,
honestly, right? But when we recognize that these things are parts in a sequence, or when we recognize that these things are a series of events that are not necessarily linear, we then begin to remove or restructure that perception of how it is that we process through trauma. Because if you would have not gone home, or if you would have not searched for Sylvan in that way, you would not have gotten to the place that you're at right now. And I've actually been looking at some of your posts from your story, and you said that this new album or this new EP is a really dark EP and it represents a death for me. And I don't know what that death is, but I'm feeling that that death is the death of the Sylvan that's like, you know what? I'm just purely reacting, or I'm behaving in a purely reactive fashion. And it is the birth of the Sylvan that is more, inquisitive. It's the birth of the Sylvan that is more insightful. It is the birth of the Sylvan that is more knowledgeable, right? So when you really look at it from that perspective, in a sense of lyrical analysis and hip hop therapy, you begin to understand why when we were on the phone having the conversation, I said, you know, rapping serves as a type of bibliotherapy for a lot of young black men because it serves that dual purpose of being able to speak, but also being able to be heard, right? And the difficulty in that comes, or the caveat in that comes, when you begin expressing yourself in such a way and people don't resonate with it.
yeah.
Because then as an artist, you begin to think to yourself, well, damn, do people not fuck with me? Or damn, are people not really seeing who it is that I am?
Hmm.
So externalizing your experience has pros and cons, just like anything else. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. You hit it right on the nail, quite honestly, man. Especially like,
Man, I listened to them EPs like 3 or 4 times over. I was like, I have to understand what this is. I gotta get it. I gotta get it.
yeah, man, you hit it on the nail, man. Bar like these EPs. I think I have like one more coming soon. These EPs are really like everything that's been repressed. All of my negative emotions were always like something that I was taught to like keep in line, keep to myself. They all spewed out in like really toxic ways. Um, I responded to situations and manners and people that I love in ways that even confused me, where I was like, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I didn't realize how much I was repressing just out of habit, being around my mother. It really was a no nonsense type of deal. There wasn't a lot of room for emotions, you know,
Mm,
and so all of my emotions came out in ways that held me back in a lot of instances.
okay,
Uh, Moments where I could have really chose to not lead with my ego and choose a different route, or just have more insight about being not as, I don't like saying being the bigger person, but taking the route that serves the bigger picture. Um, you know what I mean? Like just taking the route that serves the bigger picture. And I wanted to, for me, like you said before, music is therapy. Rap has always been therapy for me specifically. That was the way for me to say, okay, I'm not being heard. I don't truly understand what I'm feeling, but music allows me to make sense of it, and that's enough for me right now. And these last EPs were really kind of like, all right, it's time to it's time to end a lot of that desperation of like, yo, I need to do this in order to make sense of my life, to make sense of my feelings, my emotions. And that's why things are so visceral. It's not like really a mapped out like construct. How you most of my albums are like, they're mapped out constructs. This is just like, nah, let's purge all of this wildness out, because it was like budding as I started uncovering things and realizing that, okay, there's decisions I've made that I never really look back to. There's beliefs that I have that really aren't mine. I found anger, I found resentment, I found aggression, I found things that were just deeply buried in me. And I don't really know exactly what is on the other side of this. You know what I mean? Because this is kind of how I've led my life up until this point. But I do feel like internally things are shifting as I process these things. The music was kind of the first step because it started in 2019. But now it's like, I feel like these past 2 years I've been doing the work, and it's been hard. You know, like it's been really, really hard. Just in terms of being able to identify, being honest, and then also having my ego dismantled, where I'm like, yo, you know what I mean?
That ego death is real, homie.
Yeah, man, it is
Fuck,
no joke.
should fuck with you. And the funniest part about ego death is that people talk about it as if though it's a solitary event, and it's not.
No.
Right? Ego death happens in stages. But I'm gonna say something to you that's gonna fuck you up. You said that most of your albums are organized, or your EPs are organized in a particular way, this, that, and the third, when you put them together, right?
Yeah.
Just because they come together at the end does not mean that the process was linear in order to get to that point. I'm gonna say it again. Just because you got to that point where you were able to organize your thoughts does not imply that the process to get to that organization was linear, because it's usually not. Right? And you know this as an artist, but I'm gonna utilize a different example. So you remember back when we were shorties and they started releasing the concept cars for like the Camaro and the Charger and the Challenger, what they were supposed to look like versus what they actually look like,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's somewhat of an example of what I mean when I say the end goal. Just because you're able to organize the end goal does not mean that the journey was linear. That concept car went through a multitude of phases before it even came to a realization of what it is that we got now. You feel what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Even if we look at some of the other concept cars that never came to fruition, you know, when we talk about, and I know I'm kind of skipping and jumping, but when we talk about the whole idea of a dream deferred, people perceive that just because you get to an outcome and the outcome is organized, it means that everything else that happened before was organized. No, the the nonlinear process is what got you to the linear outcome, because you had to go and gather all of the elements from the nonlinear process in order to create the linear outcome.
Mm,
It's almost like a constellation. You dig what I'm saying?
yeah.
You can't immediately see the constellation, but if somebody has drawn these lines for you and tells you where to look, you can see them.
That helps me a lot because especially being someone that thrives like off of how does this work? Um, what do I need to do to get to this outcome? Especially in music, you know what I mean? You're almost like threshed into that belief system of like, what do you have to make happen in order to get to this end result? And so it could feel like that,
Right.
but the reality really isn't like that. That's actually a strong observation, man. Like,
Right.
especially relating back to what I'm going through right now, because I'm like, I couldn't tell you like what the next step for me. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, this is just a space that I know that is ending. You know what I mean? Like a strong belief system, probably one of the strongest belief systems, if not the biggest, in the past 15 years of my life, because I made a decision to live my life this way. Like, I'm going to be an artist.
Mm.
I'm going to take myself out of my environment. I'm going to be able to provide for myself so I can hopefully provide for my family. And that is the most important thing for me right now.
You said something, man, and
Yeah.
I'm glad that you said it that way. You said that I'm going to take myself out of this environment so I can provide for myself and then my family,
Yeah.
right? So the teacher KRS-One, Knowledge Rule Supreme over nearly everything, has a book that's called, it's either the tome of hip hop, or I got it sitting right there. But
Mhm.
it talks about how hip hop correlates to self development, right? If you really understand what hip hop is. And in the book, KRS-One said there's a difference between being selfish and being a selfist. Somebody who is selfish takes from the environment only to take from the environment and does not intend to replenish.
Right.
Somebody selfish takes from the environment in order to replenish themselves with the idea or the concept of replenishing the environment afterwards. Right? So one is parasitic and the other one is symbiotic.
Yeah.
Right? So when you say it to yourself in such a way where I am going to take myself out of this environment so that I can provide for myself and then provide for my family, right? A lot of Black people do not have the opportunity to provide for themselves, which is the reason why we pride ourselves on being able to provide for others while being in the midst of trauma.
Man, oh man, oh man. And that actually kind of brings me to like a question I wanted to ask you
Mm.
about taking care of yourself.
Mm.
That's that has been all right. So there's two things right now that I'm like in my, that have been pretty prevalent in the past month or two. Number one has been developing compassion,
Mm.
especially for especially for my father and how I've grown up.
Mm.
Um, just realizing like this is a very necessary step, and me being able to heal, which I would have never known. I thought like, not to go on a tangent, but I thought that making amends was cool enough. You know what I mean? But
No,
compassion, realizing okay, this is something I need to develop. So
no.
developing compassion, and then also taking care of myself, which has been something that I have never prioritized. And when I say that, it's like for me, taking care of myself was like paying the bills, making sure I could eat something.
And for most people, it's the same way.
But pretty much I could wake up the next day, like bare minimums, you know.
But that is that thriving or is that surviving? If I'm only making it to the next day, that's survival, right? That's something that we tell people who are actively suicidal, right? Or who are experiencing active suicidal ideations. If we are not able to get you immediate crisis care, then we don't need you to think too much because that can be overwhelming, especially in the space that you're in. We just need you to get through the day. And if you feel like you cannot get through the day, let us know and we will provide you with that crisis intervention, right? But that's survival mode. That's the mode that you need to be in order for you to make it to the next day so that you can continue to plan. That's something that's the bare minimum. But once again, when we talk about trauma, when you talk about insidious trauma or covert trauma, that's what we mean, right? How many do you know, or let me even say it to you like this. Why is it that Black folk, whenever we talk about what it is that we experienced and the things that we experienced as kids or the things that we experienced growing up, have you ever noticed that a lot of it is slick, like kind of negative?
Yeah, yeah,
Like, damn, you ever had a what they say? You ever had a wish sandwich? What's a wish sandwich? Wish I had some meat to put on this bitch, right?
man,
And
great.
then Black people just get the cracking up, laughing, ha ha ha. But it's like we're literally laughing about starving,
Yeah,
right? Oh damn, I had to take cold baths because I ain't had no water. We're literally laughing, or we're bonding over the shared experience of having lesser access to resources.
yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? So it's a shared experience, but that's the insidious type of trauma that we're talking about. But because we as Black people have learned how to thrive in that type of environment, we don't perceive it as traumatic, which then leads into that whole idea of you don't need to take care of yourself because there's nothing wrong.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So you asked about compassion, right? In order for you to have self-compassion, you need to learn how to forgive. But do you know the definition of the word forgive?
Not necessarily, to be honest.
The root definition of the word forgive means to give back power, right? My mother used to tell me, William, somebody is in control over you if they can control your emotions. If they push a button and you become upset, you are now in their control.
Yeah,
They control you, right? Forgiveness is literally searching within yourself, understanding why this person affects you the way that it is that they do, making a conscious decision to restructure the way that you respond to this person, and then saying to this person, I am forgiving you, not necessarily for you, but for myself. Right? I am giving you back this power that you have over me because this power does not belong in my domain. This power does not belong in my kingdom. Because whenever we talk about the word power, sometimes we talk about power we talk about power purely in a consumptive or possessive sense. Power as an individual thing or power as an individual factor is simply a measurement of a type of energy. So if there is too much energy, Sylvan, you know this, if it's too much energy going through, if it's too much energy going through a receiver, what happens?
Goes through, breaks up. You know what I'm saying? Explodes. It's a wrap.
Blows, right? So if you are a constituent of power and you have entirely too much power within your body that you cannot handle, what is going to happen?
Explode.
You're going to explode,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
So that compassion is almost like a circuit breaker. You have to learn how to be compassionate with yourself as in so much that you do not overload yourself with these negative currencies or these negative energies or these negative vibes,
Yeah.
right? But there are some negative vibes that stay with you because they provide defense mechanisms in order for you to navigate through a particular space. So if you're asking specifically about your father, some of the things that you learn from your father, and when I say your father, I don't necessarily mean your father directly, but your father in his absence,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? Some of those things helped you navigate the world. They did, right? Because we don't think about things as black and white. We don't think about things as either or. We think about things as and,
Yeah.
right? So, for example, Chicago, I currently live in Philly. There's a lot of snow, right?
Yeah.
If you have a snowplow that you can attach to a truck, it's going to be much easier for you to get through the streets when it's snowy. But
Mm,
that same snowplow does not have the same when the streets are bare,
yeah.
right? So if we're thinking about what it is that you learn from your father as the snowplow, and we're thinking of you as the truck, you have to learn how to put on and take off the snowplow.
Mm,
You understand what I'm saying? You have to learn how to utilize what it is that you learned in order to navigate, but not necessarily to continue to cause yourself damage. So when
yeah.
we talk about compassion and self-care, it begins with honestly recognizing what it is that you need in order to feel cared for, right? So a lot of people, when we talk about love languages, we tend to talk about love languages as it relates to loving other people, but very rarely talk about love languages as it relates to loving ourselves, right? Most people, their love languages come from a space, not necessarily a space of lack, but a space where they feel like these are the ways that are the best way to communicate love to me.
Yeah.
So do you communicate with yourself in the love languages that you have? Because if you don't, that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. I feel like that's an exploration.
Uh-huh.
That's like the past month I've been like in this space where I'm like, all right, I've I've spent the better part of 10 years um figuring out figuring out what freedom means to me.
Mm,
And I've and and at that point, 20 years old, freedom to me was like I don't have to go to work. I can pay my bills doing what I love to do,
mm,
and I can make music. And I achieved that. And as I began to, as I got to this space, like as I started creeping to this space, like there's just this vast emptiness that was in me because it was like this is what I solely dedicated myself to this mission, and I forsake a lot, you know, for that mission, just in terms of like myself, my well being, sleep, um, finances, relationships. Um, so I got to this point where all these things were apparent to me, and all I could do were like, okay, all what am I doing when I don't have anything to do? You know what I mean? Like what is my life really like? You know, when I'm not dedicating and being a martyr to this, you know, to this cause that I've created for myself. Like how am I enjoying myself? You know what I mean? Like it was cool to make music for like 3, 4 years consistently all the time. But after that fourth, fifth year, you know, it becomes less and less because you start to understand your craft. You start to understand how things move. And I'm not an addict to, you know, this. I'm not an addict to this craft. I enjoy it, but I'm like, what do I do when I don't necessarily have to do anything else? You know what I mean? Where I could be okay right now. And now I'm like, it's so awkward because I'm like, okay, people are cool, people are all right. Like, there's still things that I want to achieve, but I'm like, I really have to look at myself and be like, okay, what's my life like for real? You know, for lack of a better term, like, what's your life like for real? And that's been insane for me. Like, to really be like, oh, I don't know what I like to do. Like, I don't know what I enjoy. Like, you know, cool shit, watching a movie, eating, going out with the homies. But I'm like, I don't really fully understand what I like to do.
You know what's funny, bro? I'm not a rapper. I'm not, you know what I'm saying? I don't claim to do anything like that. What I am is that I am a student of hip hop, right? I'm very intrigued by what hip hop lives for and does. And when I say hip hop, I mean the philosophy, not necessarily the production,
Yeah.
right? When we talk about this idea of not being addicted to the craft but enjoying the craft, and you know, I'm gonna do this like I do my client sessions sometimes. I'm gonna give you a homework assignment. I want you to look at the differences between neo soul artists and popular rap artists.
You said the differences between neo soul artists and
Popular rap artists.
okay.
Whether it be the frequency of releases, whether it be the frequency of singles, whether it be the time of their quote unquote popular relevance, what have you. I just want you to look at that difference. And then I want you to look at the difference in lifestyle between neo soul artists and popular rap artists. And you'll begin to see the correlations between the two. Right? So, for me as a student of hip hop, I don't be I am a listener of music and a fan of music, but I am also a fan of people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah. Yeah.
when I told you that I went to high school with Chance the Rapper, the reason why I consistently bring that up is because one, he is a perfect example of you as an individual. If you like, you can literally make your dreams come true, right? But also being able to watch him grow as an individual and as an artist was very interesting. The reason being is because, so for example, when we talk about his Big Day, when he talk about the Big Day album, right? A lot of people was like, "Oh, I'm not fucking with this," da 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 da. Like it was memes, bro. Like I promise you, when it came out, it was a meme that had me crying. You know Eugene from Hey Arnold when he
Yeah.
was in his rebellious stage and he was like throwing tomatoes and shit. So it was a picture of him getting ready to throw a tomato, and the caption was like, when Chance the Rapper want to rap about positive shit like loving his wife, right? And I was like, yo, why are y'all upset at this man about being positive? I don't get it. What is wrong? Like, what's the
Yeah.
issue, right? It's because people do not perceive rap to be something like that anymore. It is no longer a conduit for knowledge. It is now a conduit for consumption. It is now a conduit for popularity, right? Now, am I saying that that dynamic is changing again? Absolutely. I feel like we're coming into a new renaissance of artists and how it is that they convey their craft. So we're talking about the Tobe and Wigwes, we're talking about the Tierra Wax, we're talking about the Sylvan LaCues. You dig what I'm saying? People who are really taking the time to dig into their souls to communicate knowledge, which is what hip hop means. It means to move with knowledge.
Yeah.
Hip means to become knowledgeable, and hop means to move with knowledge, right? So the reason why I bring up Chance the Rapper a lot is because one, when you look at his trajectory and when you look at each one of his releases, going from the 10-day project to acid rap to coloring book to the big day, when you look at all of those things, you can literally see his progression through all of those things. You can see it, right? The man literally, so 10 day is when at our high school they was doing a whole lot of fugazi as covert racism shit.
Hmm.
That's the EP that he put Fuckers You Talking About on. Like, that's the one time he's done drill music, but he utilized that in order to truly express what he was feeling. That's
Yeah.
on the project, right? Acid rap was when he was really just going through his existential journey, when he was trying to figure out, who am I really as an individual? And that's the reason why so many people fucked with acid rap, because it was relatable, right? Coloring Book, Coloring Book was the one that helped him make history, but it was also because that's when he really had to learn how to be an individual outside of himself. He had to learn how to be less selfish and more compassionate, because that's when his daughter was born, right? And then you get to the big day where he had to make a decision of, who am I going to be as a man? Who am I going to be as a person? Am I going to continue to engage with what it is that the industry says is popping? Or am I going to engage in who it is that I am as Chancellor Bennett?
Yeah.
Right? And that was his, you know what I'm saying? That was his crossroads. Tobe and Wigwe is similar, right? So if you listen to his most recent drop, you know what I'm saying, with him and Fat, he was like, yo, if I can't bring my wife and my kids, or if I can't bring my wife and my baby, I'm not coming.
Mm-hmm.
He's made a conscious decision within himself to be like, yo, I am not an addict to this craft. I enjoy this craft. This craft does not make me, I make this craft. Right? So what it sounds like as if though you are going through a metamorphosis where you are making a decision, because you have gotten to that point of, I'm able to pay. You're no longer in need of food, but now because you are full, you are capable of forward thinking thought.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And that could be overwhelming.
It can. It can. Because it's funny, because I got some friends who are like entrepreneurs and shit like that, and you know what I'm saying. It was a real crazy conversation, because one of my bros called me. He was like, you know what I'm saying, Big O, I really need your help. I was like, what's going on, bro? He was like, yo, I achieved everything that I wanted to achieve, and I don't know what to do next. And I was like, so the phrase that you utilized when you said these things were parenting me, right? But I achieved all of these things. Now I really, it was not necessarily a distraction,
Mm-hmm.
but it was a distraction,
Yeah.
right? It was a space where you were able to escape what was going on. Exactly, the caterpillar's journey into the butterfly. Exactly, right? And actually, Chance said the same thing. I knew I was fly when I was just a caterpillar, right? So it's that whole idea of that metamorphosis, and that, that ability to move forward. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So absolutely, Omi, life parents, right? Life parents along the way. But you sometimes will get to a point where you're like, damn, I really achieved all of the goals that I was looking to achieve. So now I really have to look at myself like, fuck. Because it's a very weird feeling. It's like I want to pat myself on the back, because this is the me that brought me to this point. But I'm also looking at myself like, okay, so who is the me that's going to get me to the next point? Who is the me that's gonna bring me over? Just like Dr. Martin Luther King said, you know what I'm saying, I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land, and I may not get there with you. Right? So the whole idea of understanding that navigation in life as it relates to you as an individual, and what you feel you need by yourself outside of everybody else.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. For me, it that correlates to that definitely correlates to hip hop. You know what I mean? Like, that's definitely, for me. I'm like, okay, what do I want to do now that I don't feel demanded by what the culture demands? You know what I mean? Especially because, like, I'm a hip hop baby. Like, I love the very essence of it. I love hip hop. I feel like it was I feel like it's the closest to a cultural revolution we as Black people have.
Absolutely.
Just, just
By
like,
far.
oh, we just like we figured it out, like, in some capacity.
It is literally because I promise you, bro, because I'm about to release a lemon pepper freestyle for mental to end out mental health mental health wellness month, right? Or mental health awareness month. And in that freestyle, essentially I'm talking about the whole idea of us as black people being able to make something out of nothing, reflecting alchemic escapades. And that's literally what it is, right? You stuck a whole bunch of black people and Puerto Rican people in the Bronx in the 70s and expected them to like die and not flourish.
Mhm.
Buildings was burning, you know what I'm saying, all that good shit. And they was like, oh, well, Macon and some other black folk, we was like, we're gonna throw it back to school party. And it is now $1 billion industry, and it became $1 billion global conglomerate faster in less time and with less effort and with less resources
Yeah.
than Walmart. And Walmart is $1 billion conglomerate, but it took hip hop less time to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? So when we think about that in terms of like who we are as black people and how it is that we are able to thrive in environments where other people cannot live, that's what I mean when I say we don't think about things in terms of either or. We think about them in terms of and. Because our resiliency allows us to thrive in these environments, but does that mean that we need to stay in these environments in order to thrive? What happens when we go to the environments that we actually have the resources that we need in order to live? What happens if we don't have to scrape for shit? What happens if we don't have to search for shit? What happens when we can eat and have hot water, bro? What happens?
Man, it's a different type of power. It's a different type of power, man, and that's overwhelming. It's really overwhelming because before it's really just about what's right in front of you, and it's you can almost just get intoxicated by that. You know what I mean? Where it's just like not there. You set this lofty vision, and it's like, okay, this is where we go. This is where we moving, and not even realizing that realize that at my when I set this lofty goal for me, that was my identification with my power because I felt like I didn't have a lot of options around me, or at least all the options that I did have, I knew I wasn't built for.
Absolutely.
Or at the very least, like I was deathly afraid of my mother,
Mm,
like deathly afraid. So Rat was just like, "I we move it here," you know what I mean? And
thanks.
so it's funny, man. Like the quote, I'll be honest, it's starting to resonate with me right now. And but like I never understood that Coach Carter quote. You know what I'm saying about like what is it that you're most afraid of? And then niggas go off into the power. I'm like, yo, all right, yeah, word, bet, all right, cool. Like I've always been that nigga that's just like, all right, I guess. But I'm just now getting to understand like, or at least it's very much resonating with me right now because how I've been feeling. I thought I was like slipping, maybe I was slipping into depression or survivor's guilt. You know what I mean? Like, or feeling like I was in this space of like, where else is there to go? But it's like, it's, it's entertaining the thought that there's so much more.
Mm,
You know what I mean? That there's so much more than what you thought was everything. You know,
mm.
and like getting to
Ev-
that.
Everything and nothing at all.
You know what I mean? Like I'm like, yo, this is it. This is the zenith of what I feel makes the, especially from an identity standpoint. I'm like, okay, this is the zenith of what makes the most sense for me as a black man. You know what I mean? Like I don't really identify myself in these other spaces that are being promoted to me.
Mm,
Um, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel authentic to how I want to express myself and how I want to be in this world. So rap to me was that space. And now that I've kind of gotten to this space where I'm like, this isn't everything to me anymore. I'm like, okay, well, I really thought I was slipping into a space of like depression or like hopelessness or like, what is life really all about? You know what I mean? Like this internal or external questioning um, of my own existence. But I think it's really like been a space of knowing that like genuinely knowing that there's more
mm.
and like really being like, yo, do you want to explore that? You know what I mean? Like, are you ready to really, are you willing to like let go of that bar of like survival and be like, yo, it's fine. Like trauma, like are you like it's like, yo, you're fine. It's okay.
You ready? Are you ready to stop relying on your trauma as the reason why you do things? Are you really ready to let go of that crutch and walk on your own? So I'm gonna say two things about that, right? First thing is this. When we talk about this idea of moving forward, growing, and understanding oneself, right?
You Gucci? We here? I don't think I can hear you. I don't know if I can hear you. Okay, gotcha. Wait, all right.